إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار أما بعد. Then we finished last time, alhamdulillah, with the seventh circumambulation or the seventh circuit or tawaf around the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the performance of the Umrah for Hajj Ummrah, which comes before the Umrah, which comes before the actual Hajj itself, for the one who is performing the Hajj at-Tamattu' or the Hajj wherein you perform the Umrah. You come out of the Umrah completely, meaning that you come out of the Ihram rather completely, and then you re-enter the Umrah on the 8th of Dhul Hijjah, ready to go to Mina. But as for the actual Umrah itself, then the Umrah consists, as we mentioned, of the entry, the Ihram, or the entry into Ihram, in a state of Ihram, that is, the Tawaf, the Sa'i, and the cutting of the hair. So we mentioned that a person finishes, and we're taking from Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, and inshallah today I hope to also fill in some of the gaps and some of the details from Shaykh Al-Albani rahimahullah. So Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah, he said, so when a person has finished the seventh circuit of Tawaf, then he moves to the Maqam Ibrahim. Now, as we mentioned last time, if you recall, that when a person completes the seventh circuit, when he began the Tawaf itself, what did he begin with? Where did he begin? At the black stone, by saying Allahu Akbar. So the Tawaf, each circuit of the Tawaf begins with Allahu Akbar. So when you've completed the seventh circuit and then you come back to the Hajar al-Aswad or the black stone, what do you say after the seventh? Anything? Nothing. Why? Because the takbir is for the beginning of the circuit, not for the end of any of the circuits. So once a person has completed all seven and he's finished the seventh one, he does not now raise his hands and say Allahu Akbar as he has finished the seventh circuit, because that would entail that he's about to begin another one, and we're not going to begin another one because the Tawaf is 7 circuits. So after he's finished that, he goes to the Maqam Ibrahim, which is the station of Ibrahim, and he utters the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَاتَّخِذُوا مِن مَقَامِ إِبْرَاهِيمَ مُصَلَّى, that and take the station of Ibrahim as a place of prayer, the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then he prays there 2 rak'ahs. 2 rak'ahs are prayed there behind the station of Ibrahim. Now the station of Ibrahim, if you've ever seen a picture, if you've been there, or if you've ever seen a photograph of the Haram, is that glass cabinet, that glass and brass cabinet that you see next to the Kaaba. And you see people, congregating around it and so on. The congregation around it and wiping their hands upon it and touching it, then all of that, of course, is an innovation. All of that is an innovation. However, the Maqam Ibrahim is, of course, the place where Ibrahim stood to place the black stone in its place for the building of the Kaaba. So that was the station of Ibrahim alayhi salam. So Ibrahim alayhi salam stood in that place, or that is known as the place where Ibrahim alayhi salam stood, and it is known as the Maqam Ibrahim. So a person prays behind it. There's no need to touch it. There's no wiping of it. There's no seeking blessings from it or anything like that. Rather, he prays 2 units of prayer behind it. And if he cannot pray close to it, meaning behind it and close to it, then he can pray further away. And if he cannot find a place further away behind it, then any part of the haram, then all of that is permissible for him to pray as the 2 rak'ahs after the tawaf of the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he recites in the first rak'ah Surah Al-Fatiha, followed by Qul Ya Ayyuhal Kafirun, the surah. And in the second rak'ah, he recites Surah Al-Fatiha, the opening chapter of the Quran again, followed by the surah Qul Huwallahu Ahad, the ayah. Then he returns back to the black stone and he touches it if that is easy for him. And if that is not easy for him to touch, then he does not signal his hand towards it as you did before. He does not do that. Meaning that if he cannot touch it, then he leaves it. He does not say, well, okay, if I can't touch it, I will wave at it or raise my hands at it. No, because that is not for this stage. That is only during the tawaf. Then he leaves out to perform the mas'a for sa'i. He performs the sa'i between Safa and Marwa. Of course, I'm going to come to Shaykh al-Albani and what he says about what takes place at these points, which is of course going to the Zamzam. But we'll come back to that when we discuss Shaykh al-Albani's method here. However, Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen mentions that after the 2 rak'ahs, he returns back to the black stone, tries to touch it. If he cannot touch it, then he leaves it, he does not wave at it. Then he goes to the mas'a, which is the place of sa'i between the 2 small mountains, known as Safa and Al-Marwa. And when he reaches the verge of the Mount of Safa, when he reaches the verge, meaning that he does not embark upon it, he does not step upon it, he does not rise or climb up it. Rather, when he reaches the verge of Mount Safa, which is, for those of you who have been to Umrah or Hajj, you'll know that it's just a small mound of a mountain. Then he recites the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Inna as-Safa wal Marwata min sha'airillah. That indeed as-Safa and al-Marwa, meaning these 2 mountains, are from the signs of Allah. And then he mentions, Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, that he does not recite these words except at this place. And he does not recite them again. So he recites them once at the foot of Mount Safa. Then he ascends the mountain, the Mount Safa, up until he can see the Kaaba. And in these days, it is not possible to see the Kaaba. Again, bear in mind what I'm saying is from Ibn Uthaymeen, inshallah. When we come to Shaykh al-Albani, you'll notice some nuances that are different, some differences and additions of sunan from Shaykh al-Albani. And what Shaykh al-Albani actually adds is sunan or more sunnas, not any obligations. Then he mentions, so he climbs up until he can see the Kaaba. Then he faces the Kaaba. He raises his hands. He praises Allah. He makes dua to Allah with that which he is able to do and that which he wishes. And he calls upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And from the supplications of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam here was that he would say, La ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika la, lahul mulk wa lahul hamd, wa huwa ala kulli shay'in qadir, la ilaha illallah wahdahu anjaza wa'da wa nasra abdah wa hazama al-ahzaba wahda. And he repeats, and then followed by that, any other supplication that he wishes to make to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, calling upon him, praising him, glorifying him, and so on. So he repeats that 3 times. So what does he do? He recites this dhikr, then a dua, then he recites that same dhikr again, then a dua, and then he recites the dhikr again, and no dua. Right? So he recites this dhikr, this tahleel, La ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika la, lahul mulk wa lahul hamd wa huwa ala kulli shay'in qadir, till the end. So he recites that once, then dua. Then he recites it again, then dua. Then he recites it for the 3rd time, and no dua. So how many times the dua? Twice. How many times the dhikr? 3 times. So the dhikr comes in between and not after. Sorry, the dua comes in between and not after. Then he descends from Mount Safa, and then he proceeds to Mount Al-Marwa. These are the 2 mountains. Safa is closer to the Kaaba, and Marwa is further away from the Kaaba. And you begin, of course, at Mount Safa. This is where you begin, at Mount Safa. So he moves on, descends the Mount of Safa, and then he walks towards Mount Marwa, up until he reaches the green pillar, or the green signpost. He will see it is green lights, and they are on both sides of the Mas'a, both sides of the walking path between Mount Safa and Marwa. You'll see green lights. They are closer to Safa than they are to Marwa. So when you descend from Mount Safa, then quite quickly, as you're walking at a comfortable pace, up until you reach the green lights. When you reach the green lights, then at that point, the man, not the woman does not run. The man, he runs, and it is a sunnah to run as fast as he can with a fast running to his ability, till the next green light, which is not that far away. Actually, it's not a huge run. It's just maybe several meters, longer than several meters, maybe up to 15 or so meters or thereabouts. So he runs that distance up until the second green marker, and then he stops, and then he walks the rest of the way to Marwa. So those green lights are actually closer to Safa than they are to Mount Marwa. So he runs to the best of his ability. As for women, then women do not run. As for the mahram of a woman, then if they're in a crowd and there's pushing and there's jostling and so on, then he stays with his wife and he does not need to run. He can stay with his female, either daughter or mother, whoever it is, and he does not leave her behind so that now she gets lost in the crowd. He can stay with her, and it is not obligatory for him to run. As for everybody else who has the ability, then they should run, as is the sunnah of Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to a speed that is easy for them, and without causing harm either to themselves, and definitely not causing harm to others, not pushing, not jostling, not shoving. Up until you reach the second green post, so you stop there, and then you walk the rest of the way as a normal walk, as you would walk customarily, towards up until you reach Al-Marwa. When you reach Al-Marwa, then you ascend it as you ascended As-Safa. And what did you do when you ascended Safa? Remember now, there's no recitation of the ayah, Inna Safa wal Marwata min sha'airillah. You don't recite that again. You only recite it once when you start the sa'i, never again. You don't recite it again. So now when you ascend Marwa, what did you do when you ascended Safa? What was the first thing that you did? You faced the Kaaba. So again, you faced the Qibla. So you face the Kaaba, though you cannot see it today because they are renovating the whole of the Haram, so you will not be able to see it. But nevertheless, that you face the Qibla and you do what you did at Safa, which is, of course, you raise your hands and then you say, as you said before, لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له له الملك وله الحمد وهو على كل شيء قدير لا إله إلا الله وحده أنجز وعده ونصر عبده وهزم الأحزاب وحده. Shaykh Al-Albani brings a wording that is slightly different to that, and we'll come to that. Again, you recite it how many times? 3 times. And after the first time, dua. As long as you wish. Dua and dhikr and calling upon Allah and beseeching Allah, seeking forgiveness for yourself, seeking forgiveness for your parents, seeking guidance for yourself and for your parents and for your children, and making dua for those in need, making dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes you better, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you taqwa, makes you from the muttaqeen, enters you into Jannah, protects you from the hellfire, protects you from the punishment of the grave, Allah prevents you from falling into sin, and Allah enters you into Jannah, and so on. All of these supplications, and the supplications should be focused upon the akhirah. And occasionally, there's no harm in mentioning the dunya. رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً وَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ. A person should never ever focus his dua always on the dunya. Oh Allah, make me rich. Oh Allah, give me money. Oh Allah, help me to do this. Oh Allah, help me to get a new car. These kind of ad'iyah, these kinds of supplications, barakallahu feekum, are for people who focus their vision upon the dunya. As for people who focus upon the akhirah, then they do not make supplications except if that supplication enters into a dua. Or it is a supplication that is needed, but it is not the main course and the mainstay of your supplication. Like for example, a person is ill and you say, oh Allah, bring me cure. Of course, that's something that is for the betterment of your dunya. However, you want betterment in your dunya so that you live longer and you have good health so you can worship Allah. Of course, رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي دُنْيَا حَسَنَةً. Oh Allah, give us the best in this world and the best in the akhirah and the best in the hereafter, and protect us from the hellfire. And likewise, that you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give you rizq, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give you ilm, but that ilm will aid you and the rizq will sustain you so you may worship Allah. But if that supplication is combined with the supplication for the akhirah, then there is no harm. But as for supplications that, oh Allah, help me to become rich, oh Allah, help me to get a bigger house, oh Allah, I want a new carpet, oh Allah, I want a bigger car, oh Allah, I want a second car, oh Allah, I want a second wife, oh Allah, I want all of your supplications like this, then this is a person who wants the dunya and he wants his Jannah in the dunya. So your dua predominantly, overwhelmingly should be seeking the hereafter, should be seeking forgiveness, should be seeking guidance, should be seeking salvation from the hellfire and Allah's punishment. And here and there, where it is munasib and where it is needed, that you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for increase in this dunya, where it is needed. Like you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give you rizq and so on. Then, so after doing that, then he descends from Al-Marwa, and then he does the same, walking to Safa. Walking where he walks, and running where it is to run. Where does he run from? From one green post, even from Marwa back to Safa. Of course, now, before you reach the green post or the green lights that you'll see, that the walk is slightly longer than because it's further away. But as soon as you reach the first green marker, you run, and then you stop at the second marker, the second green marker. And then he ascends Safa as he did before, and he does what he did before, and he says what he said before, and he does it again. And the rest of the sa'i is the same as he began, the rest of the sa'i. And he does this how many times? 7 times. So from Safa, As-Safa to Al-Marwa is 1. From Marwa back to As-Safa is 2. Then Safa back to Marwa is 3. So if you do that, where would you end up? Where? Marwa. If you do it correctly, you'll end up at Marwa. Why? Because it's odd number, right? So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So you'll end up on your, when you completed 7 circuits, you will end up at Al-Marwa. If you've ended up at As-Safa, you've done something wrong. Either you've mixed up something, or you've done more, or you've done less. If you're confused and you don't know whether you've done 6 or 8, right? Because that's the only 2 that could be. Can't be 7, because if you're 7, where would you be? If you did 9, where would you be? Marwa, okay? But, so you've either done 6 or you've done 8. You don't know, you're in doubt whether you know you did 5, because you're certain, because you're at Marwa. But then after that you lost count, so you don't know whether you came back for the 6th or it's the 8th. So what do you do? What do you take? The higher number or the lower number? The lower number, the 6th one. Why? Because you're certain that you did 5, because you're at Marwa, then you came back, but you can't remember going there and back again. So on the way you were maybe not concentrating, so you'd completely forgotten whether you came back for the 6th or whether you came back, or whether you'd done the 7th and you came back for the 8th. So, since you're in doubt, you base your ibadah upon that which you're certain of, and that which you're certain of is 6, and you're unsure about the 8th. And that goes for the salah and generally the acts of worship, even in tawaf. Even in tawaf. So if you know that you've done 3, for example, tawaf, and you're in doubt whether it's 3 or 4, but you know it's 3 for certain, but you're doubtful whether it's 4, then you consider it as what? 3. No. So then the person, he ascends Safa and he ascends Marwa, and he makes the sa'i, and he runs between the green markers, and all of this ascending Mount Safa and Mount Marwa, the ascending of them, reaching them, of course, is an obligation. The sa'i is a rukn, right? It's a pillar. So going from the 2 mountains is a pillar. As for ascending the mountains, once you've reached them, so you reach the mountain and you're at the mountain now. As for ascending it, so you ascend halfway or 3/4 of the way or even all the way up the mountain, then that is not an obligation. It is a sunnah and not an obligation. Then the scholars, they mention, should a woman climb up as-Safa and al-Marwa? And many of the Salaf of this ummah, they said this is not for the woman. Just like the raising of the voice is not for the woman in the company of men, then likewise the climbing of Mount Safa and Marwa is not for the women, it is for the men. Because the same reason why a woman would not raise her voice in talbiyah, the same reason why a woman would not raise her voice in talbiyah when there's men around, is that because she draws attention to herself. Then likewise, the Salaf used to say that for a woman to climb as-Safa and al-Marwa is likewise she's drawing attention to herself because she's putting herself in a position where she can be seen. And is she wearing niqab? No. Right? Hands aren't covered, she's not wearing niqab, so she's putting herself in a position where she can be seen. So it is better for the woman, and if the man is accompanying the woman, that they stay low. They reach the mountain and they stay low at the bottom of the mountain, and they make their du'as and their supplications there, inshallah. So when he has completed the 7 circuits, as we have mentioned, each circuit is from one mountain to the other is 1 up until the 7, then they end up at Marwa. When they finish at Marwa, he shaves his head. If it's a man, he shaves his head, or he may shorten his hair. If he is performing Umrah, like for example any Umrah that he would perform in the normal part of the year outside of the Hajj season, if he is doing that, then he would shaving the head is better than shortening it. However, if he is performing the Umrah before Hajj, then it is better for him to clip. Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, he mentions that the shaving is better than trimming for the men. Shaving the whole head off the hair off rather of the head is better than clipping and shortening, except if a person is mutamatti'an, except if he is making Hajj Tamattu', and which is the Hajj which is better. In this case, because the Hajj is close by and it is not possible that his hair will grow back again, then for this person taqsir, or the shortening of the hair, is better after the Umrah and not shaving, so that there is still some hair remaining on his head that he may shave after completing the rites of Hajj, a few days later. Because the Prophet ﷺ commanded the Sahaba, when they arrived on the morning of the 4th of Dhul Hijjah, he commanded them to come out of the ihram after performing the Umrah, to come out of the ihram by shortening the hair. So what day did they come to Hajj? To Mecca? 4th of Dhul Hijjah. When are they going to make Hajj? They're going to go out on the 8th, Yawm al-Tarwiyah. They go out on the 8th, Yawm al-Tarwiyah, to Mina. So therefore that's 4 days. So if they shave off their head on the 4th, is it really going to conceivably come back by the 8th? Unlikely. Or the 10th, when they actually shave on the 10th. Is it going to come back conceivably? Unlikely. So therefore the Prophet ﷺ commanded them to shorten the hair and not to shave. As for the woman, then the woman, she shortens the hair from her head on both occasions, meaning at the Umrah and after the Hajj. She does not, of course, shave, because the Prophet ﷺ forbade the woman from shaving her head. Haram for a woman to shave her head. Forbidden for her, as the Prophet ﷺ has mentioned. As for taqsir, then a woman who has plaits in her hair, plaits or plates, whatever you want to call them, but I think they're termed as plaits at the back of her head. Let's say she has 2 of them. Then each one, you take a finger joint and you shorten it by that much, which is what, 1 inch? So you take the whole hair and you shorten it by about 1 inch, the joint of a finger. If she has one plait at the back, or plate at the back, then again you take the end of that and you shorten it, and her husband can do it for her, or any other woman, and any other mahram for that matter, and they shorten it by 1 inch or so, which is about the finger joint length. So she does that after Hajj. Na'am. Then he mentioned, Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, that it is obligatory that when the shaving is done, if one shaves their head, like for example, if you perform Umrah any other time of the year, if you shave the head, then of course that is better, and the shaving should be from the whole of the head. Whole of the head should be shaved, not just a part of it, and not leaving patterns in there and so on. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, muhalliqina ru'usakum, that they are those who shave the whole of their heads, as Allah has said. And likewise the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he shaved all of his head, not just partially. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, after the shaving of his head, that he said, so that you may take your rights of Hajj from me. And likewise, if a person is cutting the hair and not shaving it, then the cutting of the hair of a man should be from all around. Meaning, you don't just cut one side of the hair and you leave the other side long. Rather, it should be all done evenly all around the head. And by these actions, a person's Umrah is completed. And they exit their Ihram completely. And it is permissible for them to do all of those things that were previously considered to be violations, the mahdhurat, all become no longer mahdhurat, they are no longer violations. So he may apply perfume, he or she may cut their hair, trim their nails, a husband and wife may have relations with one another, and so on. All of that becomes permissible because now they have completed and they have completed their Umrah. So that in essence is the Umrah. And this Umrah, of course, can be any time of the year. It's not just specific for Hajj. Now there are some, as I mentioned, some nuances that Shaykh Al-Albani mentions that Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen did not mention. So I want to mention the Umrah that Shaykh Al-Albani mentions. He mentions also that after a person has touched the black stone, or he has made ishara to the black stone, then it is allowed for him to cling to the wall of the Kaaba between the black stone and the door. So he places his chest against the wall of the Kaaba, and his face against the wall, and his forearms against the wall. And this is called al-iltizam ma bayna rukni wal bab. And that is known as the iltizam, or the clinging between the black stone and the door of the Kaaba. Shaykh, then he mentions the statement, he mentions that this narration is reported, meaning that the iltizam is reported by the muhaddithin of the Salaf, and Shaykh Al-Albani authenticates it, and he refers the people back to Silsilatul Ahadith Sahiha, hadith number 2138, for its authenticity. So the iltizam is from the Sunnah. Then he mentions the statement of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah in his rights of Hajj. He states that Ibn Taymiyyah said that if a person wishes, he makes this clinging, iltizam, between that which is between the black stone and the door of the Kaaba. So he places upon it his chest and his face and his forearms and the palms of his hands, and he supplicates to Allah, and he asks Allah for his needs. He asks Allah for his needs. So he does that in his dua. And he may, and he may also do that before the Tawaf al-Wida, or the Tawaf al-Wida, if he wishes to do so, before even the farewell Tawaf, meaning he may do it at that stage, or even before the farewell Tawaf. For there is no difference in this clinging, whether it is done in the Tawaf al-Wida, meaning the farewell Tawaf just before you leave Mecca, or in any other Tawaf that you make. There is no harm whenever you do it, in any Tawaf. And the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, they used to do it. When they used to enter into Mecca, they used to do it, as Ibn Taymiyyah mentions. And if a person, he mentions, merely stops or stands at the door of the Kaaba, and he was to make dua there also, without clinging to the walls of the Kaaba, then that is good also. Just by standing at the door of the Kaaba and making dua at that stage, then that is also good, without even making the clinging to the wall. And when he leaves from that state, he does not stand there, meaning now that he's finished from the clinging or the iltizam or from the dua, he doesn't stand there, nor does he or turn or walk backwards, meaning that he does not now do any other acts that are not reported from the Sahaba or the early Salaf. So he doesn't, for example, stand there and then when he's finished, he begins to walk backwards. There's no need for any of that. Then Shaykh Al-Albani mentions, there is no particular dhikr that is specific for the tawaf. There is no specific dhikr. And he may recite from the Quran whatever he wishes, or dhikr or dua. And the Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith that the tawaf of the house is a prayer, is a salah. The tawaf of the house is a prayer. However, in this prayer, Allah has allowed speech within it. So whomsoever speaks during the tawaf, then let him not speak except with goodness. And in a narration there occurs the statement of the Prophet ﷺ, and he should minimize his speech during the tawaf. The hadith reported by Imam al-Tirmidhi and others. Then he mentioned Shaykh Al-Albani, and it is not permissible for a person, of course, to make tawaf whilst naked, as the mushrikeen used to do. Nor is it permissible for a woman to make tawaf whilst in a state of menstruation or postnatal bleeding. The Prophet ﷺ said that the tawaf is not to be made whilst naked. The hadith reported by Bukhari and Muslim. And likewise, the statement of the Prophet ﷺ has reported from Aisha, that he said to Aisha radiallahu anha, that when she made the Umrah, when she was in a state of, when she made the Umrah, during the final Hajj of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that she wished to make, that she came to make Umrah, he said to her, do whatever the Hajj, meaning the person who's making pilgrimage does. Do whatever the normal person who makes pilgrimage does, except do not make tawaf of the house and do not pray up until you are cleansed and pure from your period, from your menstrual cycle. Hadith reported by Bukhari and Muslim. Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, he mentions that this also includes the forbiddance for the sa'i for the woman also in a state of menstruation, meaning that when she comes to make Umrah, this is Umrah either during Hajj or the Umrah any time of the year, that she cannot make tawaf and she cannot make sa'i. Why is that? She's in a state of, not janaba, she's in a state of impurity because of menstruation. But is it a condition for the sa'i that she must be in a state of purity? No. Alright? So the tawaf, you must be in a state of purity. Agreed? Of course, it's wajib. You must be in a state of purity. The most correct position of the scholars is, well, the scholars are agreed that she cannot make tawaf while she is menstruating. Likewise, there's a difference of opinion amongst the scholars whether a man can make tawaf in a state of wudu or not in a state of wudu. The most correct opinion is he must be in a state of wudu. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ said, "At-tawafu bil-bayti salatun." That the tawaf of the house is a salah. Do you need wudu for salah? Of course. You need wudu for salah. However, this salah, which is the tawaf of the house, the only difference between this one and the normal salah is what? That you can speak during it. So therefore, for tawaf, the majority of the scholars, they say you must be in a state of wudu for salah for a man. The ha'id, which is the woman upon her menstrual cycle, she cannot make tawaf of the house because of her impurity, her ritual impurity. She's not, you can touch a woman, she doesn't become impure in that sense, but she cannot make these particular acts of worship, salah, tawaf. But Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen mentions, since she cannot make tawaf for Umrah, she cannot make sa'i either. Even though Ibn Uthaymeen says, but for sa'i, tahara is not a condition. Tahara or purity is not a condition for sa'i. But she still cannot make sa'i for her Umrah. Why? Sorry? No, that's not the reason why. Why can't she just go and make tawaf? She can't make tawaf, right? We agree. Why can't she just go and make sa'i and say, when I'm pure, I'll just come and do the tawaf? Because she stays in ihram anyway. Excellent. The tartib for Umrah is an obligation here. And some of the scholars regard it, of course, to be something that is a necessity. That it is a necessity, and this is what Ahlul Ilm and the ulama of the Salaf and of later times, Ibn Uthaymeen from them, that the order must be maintained. You cannot for Umrah perform the sa'i before the tawaf. The tawaf is first. So you enter into ihram, you make the tawaf, then you make the sa'i. You don't come to the haram and make the sa'i and then decide you're going to make the tawaf. The Umrah has that order, and the order must be maintained. Ihram at the miqat, tawaf, then sa'i. And you can't mix that order up. Is that clear? Tayyib. However, Ibn Uthaymeen said that as for tawaful ifada after Hajj, meaning now you finish from Arafah, you spent the night in Muzdalifah, the following morning she's stoned, because all of this is allowed for her, even in a state of menstruation. Now she stoned the Jamratul Aqaba. She's even trimmed her hair. She may be even sacrificed. Now she goes to the haram. She knows she cannot perform tawaf, but she goes and performs the sa'i. Is that sa'i accepted from her? Yes. Why? But she hasn't done tawaf. Can she do the sa'i without doing the tawaf? Here. So we must wait for her to do the tawaf and then the sa'i in that order, right? No. Why? There's a reason why. Because the ruling of, because remember, what did we say for Umrah? That the Umrah, you said that the tartib has to be maintained, right? The order. Enter into ihram for the miqat, come to the haram, make the tawaf, make the sa'i. That order must be maintained. Does the order have to be maintained after you leave Muzdalifah and you stone? On the day which is known as Al-Hajj Al-Akbar, Yawm Al-Hajj Al-Akbar, the day of the greatest rites of Hajj, right, which is the 10th of Dhul Hijjah. What do you do on this day? You stone. What else? Slaughter if you can. Shorten your hair. What else? Tawaf and sa'i. So these are the 5 things that you can do on that day, right? What if I mix them up? Is it allowed? Let's say I leave Muzdalifah. So now it's the morning. I prayed Fajr in Muzdalifah, which we're going to come to that order. Don't worry about that right now. But in Muzdalifah, we prayed Fajr, and then we left out. Instead of going to the Jamratul Aqaba, which is what the Prophet ﷺ did, we decide to go to the Haram and perform tawaf. Is that allowed? That's why I'm asking you. You're throwing it back at me. And? Excellent. You read well. You read well. On the day of the 10th of Dhul Hijjah, all of these rites, the stoning, the sacrifice, the cutting of the hair or the shaving of the head for the man, the tawaf and the sa'i, you can do them in any order. The scholars then say that if a person does, actually I'm not going to come to that because that's for the Hajj rites. We won't come to that. But this order can be mixed up. So now let's say a person, after leaving Muzdalifah, because Muzdalifah you can't avoid. You have to go to Arafah. After Arafah, you're in Muzdalifah. In Muzdalifah, you're going to pray Fajr. After Fajr, just before when the sky becomes very, very bright, but before sunrise, you leave out. Now, at this stage, after sunrise, you have a choice. Ideally, the best thing to do is what the Prophet ﷺ did, the order that he did. And the first thing that he did was the stoning of the Jamrah. Jamratul Aqaba, which is the Jamratul Kubra, or the large pillar. That's the thing that he stoned first. And then the rest of the things of the day, the sacrifice, then the cutting, and then the tawaf, then the sa'i. Let's say a person decides, I'm going to do the sa'i because it's too crowded at the Jamrah. The haram is going to be empty because they're all here at the Jamrah. I'm going straight to sa'i, and I've got my mother with me or someone else with me, and it's going to be hard for me, or I've got and I'm not going to wait here waiting for this. I'm going straight to sa'i. So he performs sa'i, then he does the tawaf. That's allowed. So that's why Ibn Uthaymeen says that on that day, if a woman decides in a state of haid, in a state of menstrual bleeding, that she's going to make the sa'i, then that is valid for her. That is valid for her. So let's say now, on that day, she stones, shortens the hair, does the sacrifice, does the sa'i. There's only one thing left for her. What's that? Tawaf. So now she comes out of the first level of ihram, which is everything almost, except that she cannot have relations. And now all she has to do is wait up until she's pure with ghusl, and then she can go make the tawaf. You see the difference now between Umrah. In Umrah, you cannot make the sa'i before the tawaf. But in Hajj, for tawaf, which is known as the tawaf al-Hajj or the tawaf al-Ifada, it is known as more commonly tawaf al-Ifada, she can actually do the sa'i before the tawaf. So that's why when you hear Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen saying that if she performed the sa'i on the day of 10th of Dhul Hijjah, then her sa'i is sound. But if she was to do the tawaf in a state of menstruation, then her tawaf is invalid. Her tawaf is invalid. She must repeat it after she's pure, but she does not have to repeat the sa'i. But when Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen was asked, "Oh Shaykh, she performed the tawaf and the sa'i for Umrah," he said her tawaf and her sa'i are invalid. So now when you hear the scholars saying that, you think there's a contradiction. There's no contradiction. Because here in the Umrah, the order must be maintained, the tartib or the order must be maintained. But for the Hajj, the Prophet ﷺ, when he was asked, "Ya Rasulullah, we performed the tawaf before we did the stoning," he said, "La haraj," no harm. They said, "Ya Rasulullah, we performed the sa'i before the tawaf." He said, "La haraj," no harm. They said, "Ya Rasulullah, I cut my hair before the stoning." He said, "No harm." He said, "Ya Rasulullah, I stoned before the tawaf." He said, "No harm." If something is brought forward or something is done later, no harm on that day. But for Umrah, no. To continue, Shaykh Al-Albani, he mentions, is that clear? Barakallahu feek. Then Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, or Shaykh Al-Albani, he mentions that then when a person has finished from the seventh circuit of the tawaf, then he goes to the Maqam Ibrahim, and we've covered that. But he does something which is what? What's uncovered from his body, the man? Right shoulder. So before he prays, what does he have to do? Cover it again. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ forbade the prayer with the shoulders uncovered. So the shoulders must be covered during the prayer. And the scholars, they differ, is this from the precondition, from the shurut of the salah, that the shoulder must be covered and so on, or is it strictly the awrah? Then the scholars differ with that regard, but what Shaykh Al-Fawzan and others mention is that even if the shoulder is uncovered, then the salah is valid, as long as from the navel to the knee it is covered for the man. But nevertheless, the hadith is there that the shoulders must be covered. When a person prays, his shoulders must be covered. So he covers. So he takes his rida and he covers his shoulders, and then he prays the 2 units of prayer, and we mentioned that. We mentioned that already. And we mentioned what is to be recited, and Shaykh Al-Albani also mentions that. And then he mentions, or Shaykh Al-Albani makes a point here, and it is upon a person that he does not cross the path of others whilst they are praying in salah. That he does not break their sutra. He does not come in front of them. And he does not allow anyone to come in front of him either. So when people are praying, don't cross their path. And likewise, do not allow anyone to cross your path whilst he is praying. And this is due to the general hadith that forbid crossing the path of a person who's praying. Do not come in between him and his sutra. Do not come in between a person and his sutra. And there is no evidence for singling out the Masjid al-Haram as an exclusion or an exception to the rule. Rather, the Masjid al-Nabawi and the Masjid al-Kaaba, or the Haram in Mecca, the Grand Mosque in Mecca, likewise in those you have to take a sutra, even if it be that you put your bag there, if you have a bag, or you go near a wall or a pillar, or that you pray behind someone or behind a chair that someone is using, and you pray behind that. So he said there is no exception for the Masjid al-Haram, let alone that you make an exception for any mosque in Mecca. There is no exception, barakallahu feekum. Then there are some statements of the scholars that how do you maintain that in the Haram? Then how do you maintain it? If you cannot maintain a sutra you cannot put a sutra there, or there is no opportunity to put a sutra there, then some of the scholars say, then at least do not allow anyone to come between you and your place of sajda. And this is the opinion of some of the scholars, because of the huge crowds and the pushing and the jostling and so on, then at least you should stop people from coming in between you and your place of prostration. Do not allow them to pass. Now here's a difference here's a point that Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen didn't mention, and Shaykh Al-Albani mentions, that once he finishes from the 2 units of prayer behind the Maqam Ibrahim, that he goes to drink some Zamzam. Now of course in the old days, they used to go to the well itself. And of course now there is no access to the well. So what do you have? You have water butts. So you go to a water butt, and they're all around the Mataf area, the Tawaf area. There are water butts. So you go to one of them and you drink from the water, and you pour some water over your head, and that is established from the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum, when the Prophet ﷺ said that the water of Zamzam is drunk, the water of Zamzam is for that for which it is drunk. So meaning that anything that you wish from it will come to you. And some of the scholars, they used to make dua for ilmun nafi', beneficial knowledge. And the scholars used to make dua, the Salaf, like the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum, they used to make dua for good health, for well-being in this life and the hereafter, and for ilm, beneficial knowledge. Likewise, the Prophet ﷺ said that the Zamzam, it is a blessing. Indeed, it is a blessing. And it is a food that is nourishing. And it is a cure that remedies. And likewise, the Prophet ﷺ said that the best water upon the face of the earth is the water of Zamzam. For indeed, in it there is a nourishment of food and a cure that remedies illnesses. Then a person goes back, after that, then he goes back to the black stone and touches it if he can, and if not, then he leaves it, and he does not raise his hands towards it. As for Safa and Marwa, then Shaykh Al-Albani says, same as Ibn Uthaymeen, he comes, then he goes off to the mount of As-Safa to make the sa'i. And when he reaches the mount, he comes at the verge of the mountain, he recites, Inna Safa wal Marwata min sha'airillah, faman hajja al-bayta aw i'tamara, fala junaha alayhi an yatawwafa bihima, wa man tatawwa'a khayran fa inna Allaha shakirun alim. That Allah said that indeed the mount of Safa and the mount of As-Safa and the mount of Marwa, they are from the signs of Allah. So whomsoever makes Hajj or Umrah, then there is nothing wrong or no harm if he was to make the Tawaf or to make a circuit between these 2 mountains. And whomsoever volunteers to do good, then that is good. Whomsoever volunteers to do good, then indeed Allah recognizes and acknowledges gratitude. He is Shakir and He is Alim, the all-knowing. And then that person, he says, نَبْدَأُ بِمَا بَدَأَ اللَّهُ بِهِ. We begin with that which Allah began with. So he utters that word. Obviously, Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen didn't mention the whole of that ayah, nor did he mention the rest of it, which is nabda'u or abda'u, or we begin or I begin, bima bada Allahu bihi, with that which Allah begins. So what is the meaning of we begin with that which Allah begins? Excellent. He begins with Safa. Why? Because Allah in the ayah began with Inna Safa wal Marwata min sha'airillah. That indeed Safa and Marwa are from the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then the rest of it is the same as what Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen mentioned, except that Shaykh Al-Albani mentions that he faces the Qibla when he climbs up the mountain. And obviously, there is no evidence to suggest that a person has to go to the summit or break through the glass that they have there at the top, because there's a glass barrier at the top, and you find people trying to sit upon it. And even the other day, someone tried to climb over it. I don't think he was right in the head, but I think he climbed over it, and then they tried to get him out, and he smashed the glass and so on. But I don't think he was all there. Anyway, even if a person is mentally sound, you find even them trying to do things up there and believing that they must get to the summit of the mountain. No, there's no need for that. Anyway, you face the Qibla and you recite 3 times. So you recite Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar 3 times. Then the person says, La ilaha illallah, wahdahu la sharika la, lahul mulk wa lahul hamd, yuhyi wa yumit, wa huwa ala kulli shay'in qadir. La ilaha illallah, wahdahu la sharika la, anjaza wa'da, wa nasara abdah, wa hazama al-ahzaba wahda. And he repeats that 3 times, just as Ibn Uthaymeen mentioned. After the first one, dua. After the second one, dua. After the third one, nothing. But you can see the wording is slightly different. So he recites this. So he says takbir 3 times, then he makes that. And then he says at the end of it, anjaza wa'dah, meaning that Allah has fulfilled His promise. Nasara abdah, and He aided His servant, His slave, meaning Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And وَهَزَمَ الْأَحْزَابَ وَحْدًا, and He alone defeated the Confederates. So then he descends from the mountain, and whilst he's making the walk between Safa and Marwa, then he speaks with beneficial speech, barakallahu feekum. Makes dhikr, makes dua, recites the Quran, whatever is easy for him. And he mentions that when he comes to the green post, then he runs. And then he gives the reason why. He said, because in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, this was a dry riverbed valley, and in it were small stones. And the Prophet ﷺ said that the riverbed is not crossed except with vigor. So that's why they used to run. And then we mentioned that which we mentioned, similar to Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen. And then he mentions that if a person wishes, if a person was to make the following dua whilst he is walking between the 2 mountains, Rabbi ghfir warham innaka antal a'izzul akram. That he says, O Lord, forgive and have mercy. Indeed, you are the mighty, the most noble. Na'am. There's a point here that when he finishes at Mount Marwa, does he recite anything on the 7th one? Remember, we start at Safa, then Marwa. Dhikr, come back. Dhikr, come back. Dhikr, go there. Dhikr, between them. Where do you finish? Marwa. So now do you stand at Marwa and say, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah. Do you do that? No. Just like the tawaf, because these adhkar, Ibn Uthaymeen makes a tremendous, beautiful point. He mentions these adhkar here are for beginning acts of worship. Right? So, when you went to the Mount As-Safa, you began. All right, and you recited it, so you began your sa'i. All right, so you went from one to the other. Then when you got there, then you began it again for the other one. But when you finish, there's no recitation. So you go to Mount Marwa and you do not recite anything there. And then finally, for today inshallah, he mentions, so when a person does that and they've cut their hair, we mentioned of course the cutting of the hair to finish their umrah, then so you cut your hair and the woman of course shortens her hair as well, then everything that was previously haram due to the ihram becomes permissible, and then they remain, if they are obviously if it's the Hajj season, then they came to perform Hajj, then they remain in that condition of not being in a state of ihram up until the day of Tarwiyah, which is which day of Dhul Hijjah? Which day of Dhul Hijjah? 8th. Barakallahu fi Yawm Tarwiyah, which is the 8th of Dhul Hijjah. So even if you got there on the 1st of Dhul Hijjah, you perform the Umrah, you're out of ihram up until the 8th, which is it is called Yawm Tarwiyah. Then that whomsoever, he mentions, whomsoever made ihram, who entered into ihram, not intending to make umrah before the Hajj, and did not bring a sacrificial animal from outside of the haram area, then upon them is to come out of ihram, meaning, remember there are 3 types of Hajj. So a person may have come not intending to make umrah before the Hajj. So they make the tawaf because they have to do that. And then they want to stay in ihram up until the 8th of Dhul Hijjah. Or a person comes and they wish to make Hajjul Qiran, which is the Hajj of combining the two together without coming out of ihram. He said rather, Shaykh al-Albani, and we mentioned this before, the Prophet ﷺ commanded them to come out of ihram unless they had brought the sacrificial animal from the boundaries of the haram, from the hill, from outside of the boundaries of the haram. If they brought a sacrificial animal with them physically, then they don't come out of ihram and they stay in it up until they performed Hajj. If, however, they did not bring it with them, then the Prophet ﷺ commanded all of his companions to come out. Shaykh al-Albani mentions, so they come out of ihram in following the command of Allah's Messenger and out of fear and protection from his anger, because he became angry with those who didn't want to come out of ihram. As for the one who brought the sacrificial animal from outside of the precincts of the haram, then he does not come out of ihram up until he is stoned on the day of Nahr, which is the day of sacrifice, which is the day of Eid, which is what day of Dhul Hijjah? 10th. And upon that, inshallah, we'll finish. So the next session therefore begins as if we are on the 8th of Dhul Hijjah, Yawm Tarwiyah, and then we'll move on from there, and inshallah we should be able to complete in these sessions all of the rites of Hajj. Jazakumullahu khairan, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Barakallahu feekum.